There it goes. All right. So, guess to kick us off, could you tell me a little bit about your current role or job title and what's your connection with openness or AI?
Yeah. So I'm an educational development specialist. I work for the Gwen and Moss Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Saskatchewan, which is in Saskatoon, in Canada. And I've been there actually today, because we're recording this on November 1st. Today is 13 years since I started there. Um, and so, um, and I've been leading most of our like OER and open pedagogy work for the past decade, we'll say. The open access stuff is lies with the library, but the OER and open pedagogy stuff has been heavily with the Teaching and Learning Center. So I've been leading that work for a long time. I'm active in the open community within Canada. I go to a fair number of open conferences. Um, when it comes to AI, I'm far less enthusiastic. Um, we, as a teaching and learning center, we talk the subject of AI and the use of AI is obviously top of a lot of people's minds. I'm far less of a proponent of it than my colleagues. Um, and I do want to make clear that when I'm speaking today, I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not on the university or the teaching and learning center or anybody that I'm working with. Um, because for me, and I'm sure we'll go into this more, there's certain principles that are important to open that I think AI, Gen AI in particular, but AI, is it doesn't align.
All right. And this is actually a really good segue into a question to ground our conversation. What do you call AI? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it comes in a lot of different forms. I mean, when we talk about AI, that's really broad. There's Gen AI, and then there's other forms of artificial intelligence as well. I mean, I have I have an iPhone. I know that it makes use of AI for certain things. Siri is one example of that. Um, I do use even for a long time, Microsoft has had spell check and anything like that, which is built into it. But Gen AI is a different matter, as is AI that's used for intentionally for purposes that I think go against the values of open and certainly against my own. And so there's AI that's used for military purposes. There's AI that's used um, for things that we use every day, like I said, like your phone. But then we're getting into Gen AI where it's taking content that it's been trained on and creating something different. So
Uh-huh.
those are kind of different areas of AI in what I would look at.
And is there a connecting thread between the different types you mentioned, like military AI and spell check and Siri and
Yeah.
Gen AI? Is there something that makes them all AI?
Well, they all take technology that has been trained in some way to do something. It's not a person doing the action, it's actually relying on the technology to do a significant part of it.
Hmm. Right. And now to make the boundary clear, let's say we had something like a printer,
Yeah.
an example of technology that does a number of actions, however, they're predefined. Would
Yeah.
you say this is AI or no?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that if you sent a document to the printer and it saw that there was a problem with the document, whether that was the there's spelling mistakes or your image isn't sharp enough or something like that, and it fixed those, that would be a different matter.
Aha. So there could be printers with AI and printers without, for
Yeah,
example. Hmm.
right.
So there's some element of there it being technology that does actions, but also level of sophistication required.
Yeah. So there's certain types of AI. So I don't have, okay, let's do it this way. If I asked Siri to tell me um, the name of the composer of a certain symphony that was playing, that's one thing. But it's a totally different level of sophistication if I ask Siri to write me a symphony.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you say there's different kinds of AI, I guess really and maybe you could say there's a hierarchy of things being more AI and less AI.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, the idea of generative AI is relatively new. The abilities that exist there.
Okay. So it sounds like generative AI is the kind of AI that's top of your mind at the moment. So,
It is because it's what we're talking about most in higher education.
mhm, right. In that case, for the rest of the conversation, let's narrow in on Gen AI as the kind of
Okay.
AI we're talking about.
Yep.
And then up next, I've got another big, hairy question for you. And
Okay.
that is, if we're talking about open education, what does open mean to you in that context? So, shelving AI, open and open education.
Okay. The open education. So there's a few different things. It's accessible, and that could be for in a variety of ways, including cost, not behind a paywall in any way. It is um, easily findable. We can share it with other people. We can, a big part of with open is we can modify it to, in particular, meet our local needs. We can then share our modified version. Um, so those are kind of those common things about it. But I also think about it in terms of um, if our intention with those things is to expand access to education and to um, pull a term from medicine to do no harm in our process of doing this, because we're trying to do something that really is to benefit the society, not a small section of society, but society. Is the way I look at open. Is how are we, when we integrate EDI into equity, diversity, and inclusion into open resources, or we and in ways that commercial textbooks don't. Um, we're not just that isn't just about um, making people learn about other cultures. This is in a way about helping our students feel a sense of belonging, but also hoping that we can and this is one of the things from our university, one of our competencies is making sure that students can engage in um, a diverse world. And so when we can do that, because open enables so much more of that in our ability to adapt materials and our ability to not go around what publishers are telling us to do. Um, that that equity part of it is important as well, and that I when I've heard people talk about, well, we can create more open resources for people in developing nations. No, we should be working with people in those nations to help them to develop the materials that they want and that they need. Because if it's just us creating more materials for people in those nations, that's just further colonization. Um, and so I don't just see open as, the access part. It's also about doing it in a way that does no harm, that is about equity, that is about and that's making sure that they have the access that they want, they have the materials that they want, and not in a way that's causing harm to their communities. And which is when I get into problems with AI, is in those areas. Um, and so open for me and transparency is another part of it because when we write an open book or when we include an openly licensed image in something or we modify an open book, we give attribution. That's the key part of a Creative Commons license is that CC BY is at the beginning of everything. Attribution and transparency. Where did the materials come from? Is another important part of open because we need to be able to, in academia, we've talked about this, you need to be able to say what your sources were for a lot of reasons. One, because they deserve the credit and the gratitude, but also so that we can understand the reliability of the sources that we're using. And so those are really important parts of open is that transparency as well. So open isn't one thing. it's it's to me it's a philosophy. It's about that doing what we can to build equity, to help others, and doing no harm.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, so across the different kinds of things you mentioned, from accessibility in terms of cost and access, and there's open resources and there's open licensing, but the theme that connects different things is increasing access to education while doing no harm and transparently.
Yeah,
Mhm. All right. And when they're I guess these different maybe pillars of openness, um, they are sort of independent in some ways. I can imagine increasing access to an education that doesn't necessarily comply with doing no harm, or doing no harm but not increasing access, or doing something transparently without the other two. So in open education, are all three criteria required for something to be open? If it meets just some of them, is it open? Is it not? Is it in between? What does this mean?
I think for something to be open for me, it has to be all three, because if you do access without the doing no harm and the transparency, then you're absolutely risking further colonization in a lot of ways. If you're doing it we've had arguments against open for more than a decade that the quality is lacking is what the pushback is we get. Well, they're free, so the quality must be lacking. Without that transparency part, we can't make that argument that no, the quality is actually good because we need to be able to know what the sources of the material was. So that is absolutely important. Um, and the access is absolutely at the foundation of this. Is the point of open is to further um, the ability for people to access learning materials. So I do think that all three are very important parts of open.
All right, cool. So we've got ideas about open education, and we also discussed AI.
Mhm.
So what happens when we put the two together? I guess we discussed Gen AI and open education in terms of
Yeah.
expanding access to education without doing harm and transparently. So what happens when you put the two together? What is open AI in education?
See, I don't see them as going together. I think that you can improve the access part potentially, but I don't think you can do it without doing harm, and I don't think you can do it with the transparency. Because we don't know what when we ask ChatGPT to do something for us, to write this, we don't know what sources it's pulling from, so we don't know the accuracy of it. So we can't trace it back to that. We know it's inaccurate a lot of the time. Um, we just yesterday, my partner asked ChatGPT because she was curious, um, which U.S. presidential candidate was more likely to be authoritarian. And the answer it came back with had to do with Joe Biden, who's not a candidate in the election. And so that right there was an example of, okay, this is a big inaccuracy that we've got going right here. And that just took one prompt to see that. Um, but we know that there's problems with um, hallucinations. We know that there's problems with um, that it's been trained on materials that are more likely to be very Eurocentric. Um, and so we aren't going to get we're if we rely on it to create content in terms of when we're looking at the accuracy of it, we're just going to get the same stuff we've gotten in commercial learning materials that we've had before, or in other materials that we've always had, because we're still going to have that Eurocentric bias that exists because of the materials it's learning from, and because of the bias of programmers. There isn't. We still have humans as part of this. It was human content it was trained with. It was humans that trained it. So that's one part of it. Gen AI is an environmental nightmare. So there is no way that we could have it used wide scale without it causing harm to groups, to the environment. And usually the groups that are most harmed by environmental damage are groups that are already marginalized. So it could be people of marginalized groups living in I'm in Canada or the US or in Europe. Um, or it could be people who are living in marginalized regions of the world that have historically been the victims of colonization, and we ignore what's happening to them because um, we might be able to translate an open textbook faster than we could before. And here, they're going to be able to benefit from it because we've translated it for them, whether or not they asked for it. And we're causing damage to their environment anyway. So I don't think that we can do open with AI with I don't think we can do it because we can't do the no harm part that I see as part of this. We can't do it with the transparency either. And so we might be able to get one of those three things. And I think that granted, these other two are things that I'm pulling, but I do think that if you look at what we have long said about open, I think that they are important. I think that transparency and the doing no harm are just as important as the access. But everybody seems to be so focused on the access that they're ignoring the other two areas and saying they're less important.
Hmm. That's a really interesting take on it. And I guess, yeah, it really ties in with the same principles of open education. So at the moment, there is no such thing as open AI. And looking towards the future, do you think is it fundamentally impossible to have open AI? Are these things just completely mutually exclusive, or is it a limitation of what's currently available?
I think that the what is being fed into the black box of AI, of Gen AI, we would need to know what sources it was pulling from. That's one for the transparency part of it. Um, it would have to be that it was no longer being trained only on Eurocentric materials or overwhelmingly on Eurocentric materials. Um, it would and by people who that is their bias as well. It would have to be better at not hallucinating or the errors that it's making. But at the same time, because I think that the transparency part of it, that CC by part, that attribution part, I said was important in two ways. One was because we know the accuracy too, but because we should be saying who created the original material that this was trained with. Um, we can't. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. I think that too many people who are too many corporations behind it and too many venture capitalists behind it have basically said the copyright doesn't matter anymore. But I bet that if you went to those corporations, like Microsoft, for example, and were pirating copies of Word or Office or anything like that, they would be the first to say, you can't do that. That's stealing. So I I don't see these things coming together. Um, I think that I think it's here, and I've heard a lot of people say it's here, so there's nothing we can do about it. Absolutely, there's something we can do about it. We could just say I'm not using it. We could just say I'm not going to use it for this purpose because this goes against my ethics. This goes against the philosophy of open or what we say we're talking about in higher education. We don't have to say we don't have to put our head in the sand and say it doesn't exist, but we can say I'm not going to use it or this is the reasons why I'm not using it and having those conversations. But I think that, and I've said this a few times to other people, but I feel like we opened the barn doors, let the horses of AI run, and now we're like, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. And I don't think we can live like that because the damage it's going to cause based on just the reasons I've given you.
Hmm. That's interesting. And yeah, I guess that's quite enlightening about um, the different aspects in a hypothetical future of what would have to be different about AI for it to support open education. So this really was the core of the interview, getting your
Mhm.
perspective of what it would mean when open education and AI meet together. Afterwards, I have some questions about the hypothetical future.
Yep.
Um, I'd like you to imagine a future where truly open AI did exist. So this is very different AI. With what you described, for example, this is AI that does not have large costs on the environment. And it is not trained on Eurocentric materials, but includes things from all over. It cites its sources and attributes whenever it uses something. And I suppose there must be some checks that its outputs don't do harm.
Hmm.
So if we had generative AI like this in the future, what do you think the role of such open AI would be in enhancing education? Could it enhance education? Would it play a role?
I think if it actually was like that, what you're describing as this utopian version of AI, yes, I think we could use it to think for things like translation or making things more accessible for people, having, it easier, maybe even better working screen readers for people who are visually impaired. Um, and and in a variety of learning ways. Could it enhance the way we currently do education? Yes, if that all that criteria that we talked about was actually met.
Ah, right. And thinking about the space between the present now and this utopian future, perhaps in a distant future, perhaps in a close one, do you know of any emerging trends or developments that you believe would shape or influence the future of openness in AI?
I think that what would have to happen is what didn't become about how much money we could make off of it. But right now, we don't really care what the environmental impact is or the cultural impact is or any of that because hey, it made it easier for me to write an email and it's making a venture capitalist a lot of money. But the thing is, and I'll admit it, there's a lot of things in the world that do that already. This is just one more thing. And the way everybody seems to have jumped onto it so quickly is very troubling.
So that really fits, I guess, with also challenges in implementing OpenAI in education. Um, I guess being profit driven then clashes with some of the open values, and they lead to different directions.
Yeah. Yeah. Profit driven, anything that's profit driven behind open is going to create challenges. I understand, making enough to keep your business sustainable, to pay the people who work for you, to have enough for further development. But when it is about, a venture capitalist coming along and saying, I'm going to make a lot of money off of this, and I'm going to make a lot of money for a lot of people off of this, and ignoring certain things, that's a problem. Well, and I'll give you an example of this. Um, so one of the environmental issues around the use of Gen AI is the amount of clean drinking water that's used to cool servers, the server towers, the server farms. Um, Technology exists that you don't have to use clean drinking water, but it's cheaper and it's quicker. And so they use clean drinking water. And that's profit driven. And when we talk about using AI so that people are more productive, that's still mostly profit driven because it's not going to lead to greater productivity never leads to people working less. It leads to them doing more. And yes, I think that unless we change our attitudes about, and I I I'm not as familiar with education in Europe, but I can tell you that in the US and Canada, profit has a lot to say in even public education, in cost of textbooks, whether that's um, higher education costs for students or school costs for in the K to 12 systems, in the technologies that we use. Um, it's not altruistic. These things, computers don't end up in schools for less money because for less than it might have cost. For altruistic reasons, it's because, hey, we've got you now that you're committed to this type of computer, or hey, we're promoting it to the kids that are going to be buying these computers soon. It's not altruism when ultimately it leads to more and more profit for the companies. And we're seeing the exact same thing happening with AI.
Hmm, interesting. And then again, I'm thinking then of the utopian future where we have open AI, right?
Mhm.
And suppose we have generative AI models that are truly open, but there isn't widespread adoption. Do you foresee any challenges in implementing open AI in education in particular? Are there any barriers or obstacles that we would have to figure out first?
If we were in the utopian space, and it wasn't causing environmental damage. We'd also have to make changes to the way computers are built and powered and so forth as well. But it would still be there would still be issues around access. I mean, we talk about that AI is going to improve, Gen AI is going to improve access. But when you go into communities in Canada, in my province, that lack reliable internet, it's not going to make education it's not going to make education easier for them when they can't even get online. And but these are some of the same communities that also lack clean drinking water, by the way. And so when we talk about, well, we're going to improve access for these communities by using AI, but they can't actually access the materials. They would rather have the water that's being used to cool the servers. So access isn't just about um, can we create materials that they can then access? Well, can they really truly access them then? Do they have access to these materials? Um, I the fact that we can do print on demand of open textbooks is still an important thing because there might be people who need the printed version because of the lack of technological access. So when we don't have reliable internet access for people, I think that we're jumping the gun on saying, hey, this is gonna make education better for everybody, when it's the same technology. They still can't access the stuff we had. So that's going to be a barrier, is until we start looking at what does access really mean? What does it really look like for people?
Mhm. Right. And then thinking about the transition from the present to a utopian future,
Yeah.
do you see any way where we could get it wrong? Are there any risks where we are going towards OpenAI and somehow new risks emerge from using OpenAI in education?
Well, yeah, I think that, and it was the founder of OpenAI who about a year ago made the comment that Gen AI uses way more power than they even thought. And so unless we had some big breakthrough, we were going to run out of, um, if it becomes so big that we can't sustain it is one thing. If it becomes that if we become um, um, complacent, if we become complacent about sticking to those values of the transparency and the equity and the environmental sustainability. I think that sometimes we we think we think things are going really well about something, and if we become complacent about it, we risk coming back to where we are. So I do see that as definitely a problem, and those major issues within that. Um, the pushback against EDI that we are seeing throughout um, North America, at least in the US and Canada, we still have a lot of problems around the way our Indigenous people are treated here. Um, and I think that when we sometimes when we make, a step ahead, two steps, three steps ahead, we end up a step back. Right now, I feel like we're making a step ahead and we're going two or three back, um, at the moment, particularly in the US and parts of Canada. Um, so that complacency, I think, is a problem with it, with the potential of anything that's utopian.
Yeah, I see. And I suppose this question comes a little bit preloaded because one of the key values of openness is not causing harm. So presupposing it doesn't cause harm makes it difficult to answer what harms might arise too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then thinking about where we are now and I guess the trajectory we are on at the moment, do you think there is any steps necessary to move the needle? Um, Things that maybe we can do as educators or perhaps other stakeholders can do so that we go towards more open AI rather than less open AI.
I think the first step has to be that we say, slow down. What does open really mean? Does AI align with that? And if it doesn't, is there anything we can do to change that so that it will? Instead of just running, like there's people in the open community that are sprinting, and in higher ed in general, sprinting towards Gen AI as being this savior. And um, there's there's the people who are sprinting towards it, that this is great, this is going to solve so many problems. There's the people who are, it's here and there's nothing we can do about it, so let's just go along with it, and make the best of it. And then there's people who I'd like to think are me, or are saying, slow down, stop for a minute even. We have to talk about this and what this really means.
Hmm. And I guess at the moment, one of the big things happening is regulation around AI. Many discussions about whether to regulate or not and how. Do you think there's any specific policies or regulations that would support the development and adoption of open AI technologies in education going forward?
Well, we're I mean, I think we could start with some greater environmental regulations around it. Um, I saw a talk by somebody recently, and I'm sorry if I'm drawing a blank, but she was from George Mason University, and she was giving a talk on AI and the environmental impact. And Northern Virginia, which is where George Mason is actually has the greatest concentration of server farms than anywhere else in the U.S. It's the greatest concentration of them. Um, and she had given the talk over the summer, and she was saying that because of the heat, there was a drop in water levels in the river, and people were being told to conserve water, but the server farms were continuing to use as much drinking water as they needed. And so I think we need to start with some environmental regulations around Gen AI, um, um, because if that's a simple one. I mean, we run into concerns about, well, free speech and this and that, but at the very basic, we could be doing some environmental regulation around this and around technology, period. Um, because I mean, Microsoft is put in a deal to reopen Three Mile Island nuclear power plant, um, and they're going to be the sole customer. Um, that's an issue. Then we need to be having conversations about regulations around certain things like that. Um, we need to be, I don't know, it's not a regulation, but as somebody who also not only deals with open but digital information literacy, we need to be doing a lot more of that with everybody so that people understand, are better at questioning. Is that is that video real? And questioning and looking back, and this is one of the issues with transparency, is if we don't know what the original source was, it makes it harder for us to determine the accuracy of things. Um, and so I think that, yes, we could start with things like greater, and maybe it is regulations about we need to be getting digital information literacy into schools at every level around AI. Whether they're using it or they're just going to be people who are in the communities who are going to be consuming things that were created with it. And we absolutely need greater environmental regulations around it.
Hmm. These are interesting examples. Yeah, I noticed that we are now just about time. Um, I really appreciate your perspective and thank you for sharing your insights today. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add or discuss about the use and future of OpenAI technologies that we haven't covered?
No, I don't think that we've missed anything. I'm glad that you're doing this research. I'm really curious to see what other people have to say.
Sounds good. In that case, I will be in touch about it soon, and I'll
Okay.
stop the recording here.
Okay.